The mornings in our modest home used to feel like a sanctuary. The scent of fresh coffee, the warmth of Emma's laughter, and the small moments we shared were once the highlights of my day. But those mornings were long gone. Now, the air felt heavy, weighed down by the growing distance between us. Emma still looked as stunning as the day I met her. More so, even. Her beauty was undeniable, but it had become a double-edged sword. She basked in the admiration of others, thriving on the attention and validation that seemed to fuel her more than love ever had. I wasn't blind to the change. Her smiles were no longer meant for me, and her laughter felt hollow, a performance for an audience I couldn't see. I spent my days working long hours as a carpenter, pouring my heart into every piece I created. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and I took pride in it. Emma, however, saw it differently. She had grown resentful of our modest lifestyle, comparing it to the flashy lives of her colleagues and the glitzy world she longed to be a part of. The signs of her disdain were everywhere. She no longer cared about the meals I prepared or the small gestures I thought would brighten her day. Instead, she rolled her eyes, muttering things like, "My cow cooking food again," under her breath. At first, I laughed it off, thinking it was her way of teasing. But over time, I realized the words weren't jokes. They were daggers, small reminders of the widening chasm between us. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table sketching out designs for a custom cabinet, Emma waltzed in wearing a dress I hadn't seen before. It was striking, shimmering in the dim light, and clung to her figure like a second skin. She didn't say a word to me, just grabbed her phone and began snapping pictures. "Big night?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She glanced at me, her expression unreadable. "Just preparing for Mr. Beam's anniversary party. It's a huge deal. Everyone who's anyone will be there." Her tone was sharp, dismissive, as though she was daring me to question her. I nodded, returning my focus to my sketch, but my mind raced. The party wasn't news. Emma had mentioned it in passing, but there was something in the way she spoke about it that didn't sit right. Her excitement wasn't about celebrating her boss's milestone. It was about something, or someone, else. As the days passed, Emma's behavior became harder to ignore. Late nights at the office turned into unexplained absences. Shopping bags from high-end boutiques began appearing in the closet, each filled with clothes and accessories I knew we couldn't afford. When I asked about them, she brushed me off with vague excuses about sales or necessary purchases for work. I tried to confront her once, gently, over dinner. "Emma, is everything okay? You've seemed distant lately." She looked up from her plate, her expression carefully blank. "I'm fine, Nathan. Just busy. You wouldn't understand." Her words stung, but I didn't press. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was overthinking. But deep down, I knew better. Emma had already built a wall between us, and every cold word, every dismissive glance, added another brick. Then, I overheard her on the phone late one night. Her voice, low and conspiratorial, drifted through the closed door of our bedroom. "He's just boring," she said, her tone laced with irritation. "Always working, always talking about his projects. Daniel, you're the only one who understands me." Daniel. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't know who he was, but I didn't need to. The way she said his name, the warmth in her voice, it was a tone I hadn't heard her use with me in years. The next morning, Emma barely spoke to me as she rushed out the door. Her perfume lingered in the air, a reminder of her absence. I sat at the table, staring at the breakfast I had made for her, untouched and growing cold. That day at work, I couldn't focus. My mind replayed her words over and over. "Daniel, you're the only one who understands me." Who was he? A colleague? A friend? Or something more? The uncertainty gnawed at me, a constant ache in my chest. When Emma mentioned the anniversary party again that evening, her excitement was palpable. She spoke of dresses and hairstyles, of the people she would impress, but not once did she mention me. It was as though I had ceased to exist in her world. For the first time, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. Suspicion. Emma was hiding something, and I needed to know the truth. But I wouldn't confront her, not yet. I would wait, watch, and prepare. As Emma talked about the party, her words filled with anticipation, I made a quiet decision. I would attend that party, whether she invited me or not. I needed to see for myself what, or who, had stolen my wife's heart. And when the time came, I would be ready to face whatever truths I found. The days leading up to the anniversary party felt like a slow unraveling of everything I thought I knew. Emma's behavior grew bolder, her indifference toward me more blatant. She no longer cared to hide the late-night calls or the mysterious texts. Her laughter, once so familiar and comforting, was now reserved for someone else. I played my part, quietly observing, collecting every small clue she left behind. She thought I wasn't paying attention, but I was. I noticed how she came home later and later, her excuses flimsy and rehearsed. I saw the new dress she purchased, a sleek black gown that seemed more suited for a romantic evening than a professional celebration. The real blow came when I checked our joint account. Charges from high-end boutiques and expensive restaurants filled the statement, amounts I knew weren't for us. It didn't take much imagination to connect the dots. Emma wasn't just spending money recklessly. She was funding a life I wasn't part of. I wrestled with my emotions, anger, hurt, betrayal. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but something held me back. I needed to see the truth with my own eyes, to confirm what my heart already suspected. And so, I waited. The day of the party arrived, and Emma was practically glowing. She spent hours getting ready, her vanity littered with makeup and jewelry. I watched her from the doorway as she zipped up her dress, her reflection in the mirror showing a woman I barely recognized. She looked stunning, yes, but there was something cold in her eyes, a sharpness that hadn't been there before. "Big night?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She glanced at me, her lips curving into a smirk. "You could say that. Anthony's parties are always extravagant." "You must be excited," I said, masking the bitterness in my voice. "Of course," she replied, turning back to the mirror. "It's important to make an impression." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I nodded and walked away, the knot in my chest tightening. She didn't even bother to pretend anymore. Whatever this party meant to her, it had nothing to do with me. That evening, I watched from the window as she climbed into a sleek black car. Daniel was waiting for her, his hand resting possessively on her back as he helped her in. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I didn't need to. His presence said everything I needed to know. Once they were gone, I got ready. I chose a tailored suit I hadn't worn in years, its sharp lines a contrast to the pain I carried inside. Tonight wasn't about blending in or making excuses. Tonight was about facing the truth, no matter how ugly it was. When I arrived at the venue, the grandeur was overwhelming. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, their light reflecting off polished marble floors. Waiters in crisp uniforms weaved through the crowd, offering champagne and hors d'oeuvres to elegantly dressed guests. The air buzzed with laughter and conversation, a symphony of wealth and ambition. I kept to the edges of the room at first, scanning the crowd for Emma. It didn't take long to find her. She stood near the center, her arm linked with Daniel's, her laughter ringing out like a bell. She was in her element, soaking up the admiration of her colleagues, her every gesture calculated for maximum effect. "Who's the lucky man?" I heard someone ask as I approached. "My partner," Emma replied smoothly, her voice dripping with pride. My chest tightened at her words. Partner. The title she should have reserved for me was now being used to describe someone else. She hadn't just replaced me, she had erased me. I lingered just out of sight, watching as she introduced Daniel to her boss, Anthony Beam. Anthony was a man of impeccable standards, known for his no-nonsense approach to business and life. He shook Daniel's hand politely but didn't hide the slight narrowing of his eyes as he glanced at Emma. It was clear he wasn't impressed. My resolve hardened. This was my moment. I wouldn't let Emma continue her charade, not in front of the very people she had sought to impress. She had built her fantasy on lies, and it was time to bring it crashing down. As I stepped forward, weaving through the crowd, my heart pounded in my chest. The anger that had simmered inside me for weeks now burned hot, fueling every step. I wasn't just walking into a party, I was walking into a reckoning. The closer I got, the clearer the picture became. Emma, smiling and radiant, oblivious to the storm about to break. Daniel, smug and self-assured, basking in the glow of borrowed success. And Anthony, his sharp eyes watching it all with quiet judgment. This wasn't just a party of secrets, it was a stage. And I was about to take center stage. The room was a sea of polished perfection. Every guest clad in designer outfits, their laughter and chatter a symphony of self-importance. Emma stood near the center, a radiant figure in her sleek black dress, her arm looped through Daniel's. They were the picture of elegance, an image curated for admiration. But beneath the surface, I could see the lies that bound them. I stepped into the room, my tailored suit cutting a sharp silhouette against the sea of decadence. The moment my shoes clicked against the marble floor, heads began to turn. Conversations hushed, glasses froze midair, and all eyes settled on me. The weight of their gazes didn't faze me. I had come prepared. Emma saw me almost immediately. Her laughter faltered, the smile slipping from her lips as her eyes widened in shock. For a split second, she stood frozen, her hand gripping Daniel's arm a little too tightly. Then, as if trying to salvage the moment, she turned away, pretending not to notice. But the room had already shifted. Whispers rippled through the crowd, and I could hear snippets of confusion and intrigue. Who's that? Isn't that her husband? What's he doing here? Anthony Beam, Emma's boss, noticed the commotion and turned to follow the collective gaze. His sharp eyes landed on me, and a flicker of recognition crossed his face. He raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable, but I could sense his curiosity. I approached the center of the room with measured steps, my every move deliberate. The crowd parted as I walked, creating a clear path to Emma. She could no longer ignore me. Her head whipped around, her expression a mixture of fear and fury. "Nathan," she said, her voice low and strained. "What are you doing here?" The corner of my mouth twitched in a smile, not of humor, but of determination. "I came to see the party, Emma. I thought it would be enlightening." Her cheeks flushed, and she glanced nervously at Daniel, who stood rigid beside her. He was younger than me, his sharp features and confident stance exuding arrogance. But beneath his composure, I could see the cracks forming. He wasn't expecting this. Anthony stepped forward, his presence commanding. "Nathan, is it?" he asked, extending a hand. "Emma's husband, I presume?" I shook his hand firmly, meeting his gaze. "That's correct." Though I wasn't aware Emma had been introducing someone else as her partner. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd, and Anthony's expression hardened ever so slightly. He turned to Emma, his gaze piercing. "Care to explain?" Emma stammered, her carefully constructed facade beginning to crumble. I didn't mean it that way," she said, her voice trembling. "I was just what?" I interjected, my tone calm but unyielding. "Just pretending I don't exist? Just parading your lover around while mocking me behind my back?" The gasps from the crowd were audible now. Emma's mother, Abigail, who stood near the edge of the gathering, froze, her face pale. She had known. Of course, she had known. But seeing the truth unfold so publicly left her stunned. Daniel, sensing the tide turning, tried to step in. "This isn't the place for this," he said, his voice steady but lacking conviction. "Let's talk privately." I turned to him, my gaze cold. "Privately? Like how you've privately carried on with my wife. Like how you've privately spent my money." "No, Daniel. This is exactly the place for this." Emma's composure shattered. "Nathan, please," she pleaded, her voice desperate. "You're making a scene." "A scene?" I repeated, my voice rising just enough to carry through the room. "The only scene here is the one you created, Emma. You lied to me, betrayed me, and now you're here flaunting it as if there's no consequence." The crowd watched in stunned silence, their judgmental gazes now fixed on Emma and Daniel. Anthony crossed his arms, his disapproval evident. "Emma," he said, his voice cold, "this is highly inappropriate. I value integrity in my company, and what I've just witnessed raises serious concerns." Emma's face crumpled, her carefully constructed world beginning to collapse around her. She turned to Abigail, silently begging for support, but her mother looked away, her guilt and complicity written all over her face. I took a deep breath, letting the weight of the moment settle. I came here tonight not to embarrass you, Emma, but to remind you of something you've clearly forgotten. Respect? Respect for me, for our marriage, and for the life we built together. You've thrown it all away for this. I gestured to Daniel, who now looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. The man who had once stood so confidently beside my wife was now a shadow of himself, his bravado stripped away. The room remained silent as I stepped back, the truth hanging heavy in the air. "I'll leave you to your party," I said, my voice steady. "But don't mistake my departure for surrender. This isn't over." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving Emma, Daniel, and the stunned crowd behind. The whispers began again as I exited, the weight of the truth rippling through the room. As I stepped into the night, the cool air hit my face, a sharp contrast to the heat of the confrontation. I had exposed the lies, laid bare the betrayal, but I knew the battle wasn't finished. This was just the beginning. The moment I stepped out of the venue, the cool night air hit me like a bomb, soothing the fire that had raged within me all evening. But even as I walked away, I knew this wasn't the end. The silence inside the room I'd left behind must have been deafening. Emma, Daniel, and Abigail had no choice but to face the fallout of what had just occurred. And while I may have exited gracefully, the damage had been done. I didn't leave entirely. Instead, I waited, not out of a desire to watch them crumble, but because I wanted to make sure Emma and Daniel didn't spin the narrative into something it wasn't. I leaned against a nearby lamppost, just far enough from the venue's main entrance to remain unnoticed, but close enough to hear the murmurs spilling out with the guests. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. What had been a glamorous celebration was now tainted with scandal and shame. Anthony Beam, ever the professional, tried to maintain order, but even he couldn't fully mask his disdain. "Emma," I heard him say, his voice sharp and authoritative, "your actions have not only embarrassed you but have also cast a shadow over this event. I value integrity above all else, and tonight, I've seen none of it from you." Emma's stammered apologies were weak and unconvincing. "Mr. Beam, I can explain." "There's no need," Anthony interrupted, his tone icy. "You've said enough." Meanwhile, Daniel, the once cocky man who had paraded around with my wife, was beginning to unravel. "This was a mistake," he muttered, his voice carrying just far enough for me to hear. "I never signed up for this." I almost laughed at his cowardice. It was so predictable. When the fantasy he had built with Emma began to collapse, he couldn't handle the weight of it. His bravado had been nothing more than a facade, and now that facade was cracking. Abigail, ever the enabler, tried to salvage what little dignity Emma had left. "Anthony," she began, her tone pleading, "surely we can resolve this privately. Emma has made some poor choices, but—" Anthony cut her off with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Mrs. Morris, your attempts to shield your daughter only make this worse. I suggest you step back before you damage your own reputation further." From my vantage point, I watched as Abigail's shoulders slumped, her defeat as visible as the embarrassment on Emma's face. The crowd had grown quieter, their whispers fading as Anthony's words carried weight. Emma and Daniel finally emerged from the building, their faces pale and drawn. Abigail trailed behind them, her usual confidence replaced with a nervous shuffle. I stayed in the shadows, watching as Emma looked around frantically, likely searching for me. Her perfect evening had crumbled, and for the first time, I could see real panic in her eyes. Daniel broke the silence, his voice sharp. "I'm done, Emma. This was a disaster. You said you had things under control, but clearly, you don't." Emma's head snapped toward him, her voice rising in desperation. "You're abandoning me now? After everything?" He scoffed, his arrogance seeping through. "I didn't sign up for public humiliation, Emma. This isn't my mess to fix." "You're a coward," she shouted, her voice cracking. "You were fine parading me around when it suited you, but the moment things get difficult, you run?" Daniel didn't respond. Instead, he walked away, his steps brisk and determined, leaving Emma and Abigail standing alone under the dim light of the street lamp. I stepped out from the shadows then, my presence startling them both. Emma's eyes widened, and Abigail flinched as if my very existence was a blow to her pride. "You're still here," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I told you this wasn't over," I replied calmly, stepping closer. "You've lied, humiliated me, and mocked everything I've worked for. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences?" Abigail found her voice, her tone defensive. "Nathan, she made a mistake. People make mistakes. Don't let this ruin everything." I turned to her, my gaze cold. "This didn't just happen, Abigail. You knew. You encouraged her. You stood by while your daughter betrayed her husband and destroyed her marriage. Don't pretend you're innocent." Abigail opened her mouth to protest but thought better of it. Her silence spoke volumes. Emma, meanwhile, looked as if the weight of the night was finally crushing her. "Nathan," she began, her voice trembling. I don't know what to say." I shook my head, my anger giving way to something closer to pity. "Don't say anything, Emma. Words mean nothing now. Actions do. And yours have told me everything I need to know." I stepped back, my heart heavy but resolute. "I'll be filing for divorce," I said, my voice steady. "You've made your choice, and now I'm making mine." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving them behind in the cold night air. Emma's sobs echoed faintly behind me, but I didn't look back. This was her reckoning, and I had no intention of staying to watch her wallow in it. The drive home was quiet, the weight of the evening settling over me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was free from the lies, the betrayal, and the toxic relationship that had consumed so much of my life. As I pulled into my driveway, I glanced at the modest home I had built with my own hands. It wasn't grand or luxurious, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like it was a place where I could start over. The confrontation had left a heavy silence in its wake, but it was a silence that came with clarity. Emma's betrayal, Abigail's complicity, and Daniel's cowardice had all been laid bare, and I had made my stance clear. Now, it was time to move forward, but not before the fallout of the night reached its inevitable conclusion. The morning after the party, I received a call from Anthony Beam. His voice was measured but firm, the kind of tone that left no room for misinterpretation. "Nathan," he began, "I wanted to thank you for attending last night. While the circumstances were less than ideal, I respect the way you handled yourself." "Thank you, Mr. Beam," I replied. "That means a lot coming from you." "I also wanted to let you know," he continued, "that Emma is no longer employed at my company. Her actions have not only damaged her reputation but have also brought unnecessary attention to the firm. I won't tolerate that." I wasn't surprised, but hearing it still made the weight of everything sink in deeper. Emma had lost more than just her dignity. She had lost the career she'd been so proud of. A part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, but another part knew this was a consequence she had earned. "Understood," I said finally. "Thank you for letting me know." Anthony paused, his tone softening. "For what it's worth, Nathan, you deserve better than what you've been through. I hope you find it." The call ended, and I sat in the quiet of my kitchen, letting his words wash over me. "You deserve better." It was a sentiment I hadn't allowed myself to believe for a long time, but now I realized he was right. I had spent years trying to make a life with someone who didn't value me, and it was time to stop. Later that day, I received an email from Emma. It was short, filled with apologies and pleas for forgiveness, but the words rang hollow. She wrote about how she hadn't meant for things to go so far, how she had gotten swept up in the excitement of something new. She claimed she still loved me, but even as I read her message, I knew it wasn't love she felt, it was regret. Regret for getting caught, for losing the life she had taken for granted. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Days turned into weeks, and I began the process of untangling my life from Emma's. Filing for divorce was both painful and liberating, a final step in severing the ties that had bound me to her betrayal. Abigail tried to reach out once, calling to plead on Emma's behalf, but I didn't take her call. She had been as complicit in the lies as her daughter, and I had no room for either of them in my life. Meanwhile, news of the party spread through our social circles like wildfire. Emma's fall from grace became a cautionary tale, her once pristine reputation reduced to whispers of scandal. Daniel, too, faced the consequences of his choices. His involvement with Emma made him a pariah among his peers, and he quickly disappeared from the public eye. It was as if he had never existed, a fitting end for a man who had thrived on arrogance and deceit. For me, the aftermath brought a strange sense of peace. The house, once filled with tension and unspoken words, became a place of solitude and reflection. I spent my days focusing on my work, pouring my energy into projects that brought me joy. The nights, though quiet, were no longer lonely. They were a time to rediscover who I was, independent of the life I had shared with Emma. One evening, as I sat in my workshop sanding down a piece of oak, a thought struck me. Betrayal, as devastating as it was, had given me something I hadn't expected: freedom. Freedom to rebuild, to let go, to create a life that was mine alone. I stood there for a moment, the smell of sawdust in the air, and smiled for the first time in what felt like years. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was mine to walk, and for the first time in a long time, I felt ready. The days following my decision to move on felt lighter, though they weren't without moments of heaviness. It wasn't easy erasing years of a shared life, but each step I took felt like peeling away a layer of grief and regret, leaving room for something new. I avoided Emma entirely, letting the lawyers handle the divorce proceedings. It was cleaner that way, less emotional, less painful. Then came the news I hadn't been expecting. Abigail showed up at my doorstep one rainy afternoon, her face pale and drawn. For a moment, I considered not answering, but curiosity won out. When I opened the door, her appearance startled me. She looked as though the weight of everything had finally settled on her shoulders. "Nathan," she said, her voice trembling, "can we talk?" I hesitated, then stepped aside, gesturing for her to come in. She entered, clutching her purse as though it were a lifeline, and sat stiffly on the edge of the couch. I took a seat across from her, folding my hands and waiting for her to speak. "I know I have no right to ask for your time," she began, her gaze fixed on the floor. "But I needed to see you. To explain." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "Explain what, Abigail? That you encouraged your daughter to betray me? That you stood by and watched her tear apart everything we built?" She flinched at my words, tears welling in her eyes. "You're right," she said, her voice breaking. "I failed you, Nathan. I failed Emma. I thought I was helping her. I wanted her to have more than I did, to secure a better future. And that involved destroying me in the process?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. "Do you even hear yourself?" She nodded, her tears spilling over. "I hear it now. I see it now. But at the time, I thought it was the right thing to do. I didn't realize how far she had gone, how much damage it would cause." I shook my head, frustration and pity warring within me. "Abigail, you didn't just fail Emma, you failed both of us. You encouraged her greed, her arrogance, and now look where it's gotten her." She broke down then, sobbing into her hands. "I know," she choked out. "She's lost everything. Her job, her friends, even Daniel. She's devastated, Nathan. She doesn't know how to move forward." Her words struck a chord in me, but not in the way she likely intended. Emma's misery didn't bring me satisfaction. It only reinforced how far we had both fallen. But unlike Emma, I had chosen to rise again. She was still clinging to the wreckage, unable, or unwilling, to let go. "I'm sorry for what she's going through," I said finally. "But she made her choices, and now she has to live with them." Abigail nodded, her sobs subsiding into quiet sniffles. I hope someday you can forgive us. Both of us." I met her gaze, my expression unreadable. "Forgiveness isn't about letting someone back into your life, Abigail. It's about letting go of the anger. I'm working on that, but it doesn't mean I'll forget." She nodded again, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Without another word, she stood and made her way to the door. I didn't stop her, and I didn't offer reassurances. This was her burden to carry, just as Emma's choices were hers. After she left, I sat in silence, processing the encounter. Abigail's visit hadn't changed anything, but it had given me closure of a sort. She had admitted her role, and while it didn't erase the pain, it was enough for me to let go of the resentment I had carried toward her. That evening, I walked through the house, taking in the quiet. The space that once felt suffocating now felt like my own. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a home, a place where I could heal and rebuild. I spent the rest of the night working in my workshop, the rhythmic sound of sanding wood grounding me. The piece I was working on, a custom dining table, was nearly finished. It wasn't just a project. It was a symbol of the life I was building. Strong, steady, and entirely my own. As I packed up for the night, I glanced at the table, running my hand over its smooth surface. It wasn't perfect. There were small imperfections in the wood, knots and grains that couldn't be sanded away. But those flaws made it unique, gave it character. Much like my life now, it was a testament to resilience and transformation. I turned off the lights and headed to bed, a sense of calm settling over me. Abigail's visit had reopened old wounds, but it had also reminded me of how far I had come. I wasn't the man I was when this all began. I was stronger, wiser, and ready to move forward. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Days turned into weeks, and Emma's world continued to crumble. The woman who once thrived on admiration and validation had become a ghost of her former self. News of her betrayal and the public confrontation at the party had spread like wildfire, leaving her ostracized by her peers and abandoned by those she once considered friends. Daniel's cowardly retreat had been the final nail in the coffin. He had left her to face the fallout alone, washing his hands of the affair as if it had been nothing more than a fleeting mistake. The man who had once held her hand so confidently now avoided her calls, his words echoing in her ears. I didn't sign up for this. The news reached me indirectly, through whispers in the community and the occasional message from mutual acquaintances. Each update painted the same picture. Emma, humiliated and struggling, unable to rebuild the life she had so eagerly dismantled. I felt no satisfaction in her downfall. Instead, it was a somber reminder of the choices she had made and the price she now paid. One afternoon, as I was finishing a project in my workshop, I received an unexpected knock at the door. Wiping my hands on a cloth, I opened it to find Abigail standing there once again. This time, she looked even more defeated, her shoulders hunched and her eyes filled with sorrow. "Nathan," she began softly, "I hate to bother you again, but it's Emma. She's not doing well." I stepped aside, letting her in, though my patience with these visits was wearing thin. "What do you want me to do about it, Abigail?" I asked, my tone measured but firm. "I've made my decision. I'm moving on." She sat down heavily on the couch, wringing her hands. "I know you are, and I don't blame you. But Emma, she's lost. She doesn't know how to fix this." "Fix it?" I raised an eyebrow. "Abigail, this isn't something she can just fix. She made her choices. She has to live with them." "I know," Abigail said, tears brimming in her eyes. "But she's my daughter, Nathan. Watching her go through this it's breaking me." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Abigail, I understand you're worried about her. But you need to understand something. I spent years giving her everything I had. My love, my trust, my loyalty. And she threw it all away for someone else. I can't be the one to save her now." Abigail nodded slowly, her tears spilling over. I don't know how to help her." "That's for her to figure out," I replied gently but firmly. "She's an adult. She made these choices. Now she has to face the consequences." Abigail stayed for a while longer, her presence a quiet reminder of the wreckage Emma had left behind. When she finally left, I felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. I wasn't angry anymore, but I couldn't carry the weight of Emma's mistakes for her. She had to find her own way. Later that evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, I thought about Emma. I wondered if she regretted what she had done, if she truly understood the depth of the pain she had caused. It didn't matter anymore, not really. Her regret, if it existed, couldn't change the past, and I was done letting it define my future. The next morning, I received a letter in the mail. The envelope was plain, unmarked except for my name, scrawled in familiar handwriting. Inside, I found a single sheet of paper with a message from Emma. Nathan, I don't know if you'll read this or if you even care anymore, but I need to say it. I'm sorry for everything, for hurting you, for betraying you, for not valuing what we had. I see it now, what I threw away, and I hate myself for it. You were the best thing in my life, and I was too blind to see it. I don't expect your forgiveness, and I know I don't deserve it. I just needed you to know that I regret it all. I'm sorry, Emma. I read the letter twice, my emotions a tangled mess. Her words were raw, filled with remorse, but they couldn't undo what had been done. Still, they felt genuine, a small glimpse of the woman I had once loved. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, unsure of what to do with it. Forgiveness wasn't something that could be given lightly, and while her apology was a step, it wasn't enough to bridge the chasm between us. That night, I found myself reflecting on the journey I had been through. Betrayal, heartbreak, and anger had marked the beginning, but now, I was on a path of healing and self-discovery. Emma's regret was her burden to carry, just as my growth was mine to embrace. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a sense of closure settling over me. Emma's letter was a reminder of the past, but it was also a testament to how far I had come. I wasn't the man she had left behind. I was stronger, wiser, and ready to keep moving forward. The days after Emma's letter were surprisingly calm. The storm that had raged in my life for so long had finally subsided, leaving behind a strange, quiet clarity. I didn't respond to her letter, not because I wanted to hurt her, but because there was nothing more to say. Her regret, while genuine, was hers to process. My journey had taken me far beyond the point where her words could pull me back. The divorce proceedings moved forward swiftly. Emma had no grounds to contest the separation, and I had no interest in dragging things out. By the time the final papers were signed, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. It wasn't easy letting go of a life I had once dreamed of, but it was necessary. The man I was becoming had no place in that old story. The news of our divorce made its way through the community. Some people reached out, offering their support and sympathy, while others kept their distance, wary of involving themselves in the fallout. For the most part, I kept to myself, focusing on rebuilding my life one step at a time. It was during this period that Anthony Beam reached out again, this time with an unexpected offer. He called one evening, his voice as steady and commanding as ever. Nathan, he began, I've been following your story, and I have to say, I admire the way you've handled yourself. Integrity like yours is rare these days. Thank you, Mr. Beam, I replied, unsure of where the conversation was headed. I wanted to discuss an opportunity with you, he continued. I've been thinking about expanding into a new line of business, custom furniture. Your reputation as a carpenter speaks for itself, and I believe you'd be the perfect person to lead this venture. I was taken aback, the offer catching me off guard. That's generous, I said, my mind racing. But why me? Because you've proven you're not just skilled, you're principled, he said. And that's the kind of person I want to work with. I took a moment to consider his words. The idea of starting something new, something entirely my own, was both exciting and daunting. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt right. This wasn't just a job. It was a chance to create something meaningful, to take the lessons of my past and turn them into a foundation for my future. I'd be honored, I said finally, a smile spreading across my face. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. I threw myself into the new venture, collaborating with Anthony and his team to design a line of custom furniture that combined craftsmanship with modern elegance. The work was demanding, but it was also deeply fulfilling. For the first time in years, I felt like I was building something that truly mattered. Meanwhile, Emma's life continued to unravel. She had moved in with Abigail, her once pristine image now a shadow of its former self. Friends who had once flocked to her side had vanished, unwilling to associate with the scandal she had become. Abigail, for all her flaws, tried to support her daughter, but even she couldn't shield Emma from the consequences of her actions. Occasionally, I would hear snippets of news about Emma's struggles, her attempts to find work, her moments of despair, but I didn't let them linger in my mind. I wished her no harm, but I also knew her redemption was not my responsibility. She had to find her own path, just as I had found mine. One evening, as I was locking up the workshop, Anthony stopped by to check on our progress. We stood in the fading light, discussing plans for the upcoming launch, when he turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You know, Nathan," he said, "people often think betrayal destroys a person. But watching you, I see that it can do the opposite. It can forge something stronger." I nodded, his words resonating deeply. "It's not the betrayal itself," I replied. "It's what you choose to do with it." As I walked home that night, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The betrayal that had once consumed me no longer held power over my life. I had faced it, endured it, and emerged stronger on the other side. Emma's regret, Daniel's cowardice, Abigail's complicity, they were all pieces of a story that had shaped me but didn't define me. My life was my own now, and I was determined to make it something worth living. The divorce papers arrived in the mail the next morning, officially marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. I signed them without hesitation, a smile tugging at the corners of my lips. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. The finality of the divorce brought an unexpected wave of emotions. It wasn't sadness, exactly. It was more like standing at the edge of a cliff, staring at the vast unknown ahead. For years, my identity had been tied to my role as Emma's husband, the man who supported her dreams even as she dismantled ours. Now, I was untethered, free to build a life entirely on my own terms. Emma's absence was noticeable, but not in the way I had feared. The house was quieter, yes, but it wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. I found joy in the little things again. Waking up to sunlight streaming through the windows, enjoying a cup of coffee without tension hanging in the air, and spending long evenings in my workshop. Every so often, I thought of Emma. It was impossible not to. The memories of our life together weren't all bad. There had been love, once, and dreams we had shared before they were eclipsed by her ambitions and my growing resentment. But those thoughts no longer hurt. They were just echoes, reminders of a time that had passed. One afternoon, I ran into Abigail at the local market. She looked older than I remembered, the strain of the last few months etched into her features. She hesitated when she saw me, as though unsure whether to approach. I gave her a polite nod, deciding to bridge the gap. "Abigail," I said, my tone neutral, "how have you been?" She sighed, her shoulders sagging. "I've been better, Nathan. Thank you for asking." There was an awkward silence before she continued. "Emma, she's not doing well. She's struggling." I nodded, keeping my emotions in check. "I'm sorry to hear that." "She's trying to pick up the pieces," Abigail added, her voice faltering. "But it's hard for her. She knows she messed up, Nathan. She knows what she lost." I didn't respond immediately, letting her words hang in the air. Finally, I said, "Abigail, I hope she finds her way. I really do. But that's not my path anymore." Abigail nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I understand. I thought you should know." We parted ways, and as I walked back home, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Abigail's words stirred memories, but they didn't sway my resolve. I had already made peace with the past. Emma's journey was her own now, just as mine was mine. As the weeks turned into months, my life began to take on a new rhythm. The furniture business I started with Anthony flourished, gaining attention for its unique designs and quality craftsmanship. Each piece I created felt like a testament to my resilience, a physical reminder of the strength I had found within myself. One day, as I worked on a new design, Anthony stopped by the workshop. He held a glossy magazine in his hand, flipping it open to reveal a glowing review of our business. "You've done something incredible here, Nathan," he said, his pride evident. "This is just the beginning." I smiled, feeling a swell of gratitude. "Thank you, Anthony, for everything." That evening, as I stood on the porch of my home, watching the sunset, I reflected on how far I had come. The betrayal that once consumed me was now just a chapter in my story, a stepping stone toward a brighter future. I thought about Emma, not with anger or regret, but with a sense of closure. She had made her choices, and so had I. We were no longer tied to each other, and that freedom was a gift I didn't take lightly. For the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. The life I was building was mine alone, shaped by my values, my dreams, and my determination to move forward. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of gold and crimson, I knew that the best was yet to come. The months following the divorce turned into years of quiet growth and reflection. My life had taken on a steady rhythm, one that brought a sense of fulfillment I hadn't experienced in a long time. The furniture business I had built with Anthony became a thriving venture, earning accolades for its unique craftsmanship and design. It wasn't just a job, it was a passion, something that gave me purpose and pride. My home, once a place of tension and silence, had become a sanctuary. The space felt lighter, filled with the hum of creativity and the quiet joy of living on my terms. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer dictated my days. Instead, they served as reminders of how far I had come. One evening, as I walked through town, I passed by a cafe I hadn't noticed before. Its warm light spilled onto the cobblestone street, and the sound of soft laughter drifted out through the open windows. On impulse, I stepped inside, drawn by the inviting atmosphere. I found a seat near the window and ordered a coffee, content to watch the world go by. As I sat there, a woman approached my table, her smile bright and genuine. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Not at all." She introduced herself as Claire, a local artist who had recently moved to town. We struck up an easy conversation, talking about everything from her paintings to the intricacies of woodworking. There was something refreshing about her presence. No pretenses, no hidden motives. Just honesty and warmth. Over the weeks that followed, Claire and I grew closer. She had her own story of heartbreak and resilience, and we bonded over our shared experiences. Our relationship wasn't rushed or forced. It was built on mutual respect and understanding. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of hope, a belief that love could exist without betrayal or pain. Meanwhile, news of Emma trickled in occasionally, though I didn't seek it out. She had managed to find work in a neighboring city, taking on small jobs to make ends meet. Abigail had moved in with her, offering support as Emma tried to rebuild her life. They were no longer a part of my world, and I was okay with that. One day, I received a letter from Emma. It was brief, much like the last one, but this time it carried a different tone. "Nathan, I heard about your business and the success you've found. I wanted to say congratulations. You deserve it. I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but I hope you found happiness. I'm trying to find my own, too. Emma." I read the letter twice before tucking it away in a drawer. Her words didn't stir the same emotions they once would have. I didn't feel anger or sadness, only a quiet acknowledgement that she was trying to move forward, just as I had. The years continued to pass, each one better than the last. Claire and I eventually married in a small, intimate ceremony surrounded by close friends. It wasn't grand or extravagant, but it was perfect. Standing there, looking into her eyes, I realized that the life I had now was one I could never have imagined back then. It was richer, fuller, and filled with genuine connection. Emma's story, while painful, had become just a chapter in my life, a lesson in resilience and the value of integrity. She served as a reminder of how far I had come, but she no longer defined me. The man I was now had grown from those ashes, stronger and more sure of himself. As Claire and I stood on the porch of our home one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a sense of peace that was once foreign to me. My journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Betrayal had broken me, but it had also made me. And in the quiet moments of my new life, surrounded by love, purpose, and the promise of tomorrow, I knew I had truly found my new beginning.